Sabalenka secretly peddled the one thing Alex Eala trusted her with, a $250,000 training blueprint built from sacrifice, silence, and sweat. The world number one didn't just break a competitor, she dismantled a believer. This wasn't rivalry. This was betrayal, dressed in a warm smile and a handshake. Because when Eala publicly declared she'd steal Sabalenka's serve for sure, she had no idea something far more valuable had already been stolen from her. Nobody warned her, nobody stopped it. And by the time the tennis world discovered what actually transpired behind closed doors, 3 rival coaching camps had already weaponized her methods against her, on the exact courts where she was fighting to prove herself. To understand the magnitude of this betrayal, you must first understand how deeply Alex Eala revered Ariana Sabalenka. Not in the casual way young athletes admire champions from a distance, not in the way a fan tapes a poster to a bedroom wall. Eala's admiration was architectural. She studied Sabalenka the way engineers study bridges, not because the bridge is beautiful, but because it refuses to fall. Everything about Eala's emergence confirmed this. When the Miami Open 2025 handed her a wildcard entry and she walked onto those courts ranked 140th in the world, her game already carried unmistakable fingerprints of influence. The aggressive baseline positioning, the willingness to take the ball early and redirect pace with authority rather than deflection, the relentless, forward-leaning pressure that refused to allow opponents any recovery rhythm. These were not accidents of development, they were deliberate architectural choices. In early 2026, ahead of the Miami Open, Eala sat with Tennis Express for an interview that would later take on haunting significance. Asked which shot from any player in the world she'd choose to possess, she answered without hesitation, "I would steal Sabalenka's serve for sure." The word steal. Innocent at the time, devastating in retrospect, because behind that public admiration lived something far more structured. Throughout late 2025, sources within the Filipino tennis community began describing an informal mentorship arrangement, never publicized, never officially confirmed, but substantiated through whisper networks spanning 3 continents. Eala's team had invested aggressively in developing a comprehensive training methodology, a proprietary framework assembled by her coaching staff at significant financial cost, reportedly totaling $300,000 across specialist consultants, biomechanical analysts, and serve mechanics experts drawn from multiple disciplines. The program's central ambition was explicit: reverse engineer the technical architecture of the WTA's most dominant serve and reconstruct it within Eala's physical profile. Sabalenka was aware this program existed. She had learned of it through the touring community's relentless information exchange, the informal conversations between hitting partners, the corridor discussions between coaches who share locker room access across tournaments. And rather than ignore it, she had reportedly engaged, expressed interest, made gestures toward collaboration. Eala's team, flattered and excited, had shared materials. Not everything, but enough. The question nobody thought to ask in that moment was, why would the world number one be interested in studying the methodology of a player ranked outside the top 50? The answer, it turned out, was not flattering, but nobody understood that yet, because the warmth felt authentic, the interest seemed genuine, and Alex Eala, 20 years old, ascending rapidly, deeply respectful of the hierarchy she was climbing, had no framework for imagining that someone at that level would need to exploit someone at hers. That innocence was precisely what made her vulnerable. Here is where the story fractures into something genuinely difficult to process. 3 rival coaching camps, 3 of the WTA's most analytically sophisticated preparation teams, 3 separate moments spread across a 6-week window where detailed components of Alex Eala's proprietary training framework arrived in the hands of coaches preparing players who would directly compete against her. The first indication reached Isla's support network through a training analyst in Madrid. While reviewing preparation footage for an opponent Isla was scheduled to face, the analyst noticed specific drill sequences, particular service practice patterns, weight transfer protocols, ball toss mechanics that bore a striking and impossible to dismiss resemblance to methodology developed exclusively within Isla's program. The similarity was too precise for coincidence, too technically specific for independent parallel development. Someone had shared something they held no authority to share. The second confirmation arrived from a hitting partner connected to one of the three camps. Careful not to identify their source, this individual confirmed in a private conversation that later reached Isla's team that specific documentation had circulated, not general coaching philosophy, granular, detailed, the kind of material that takes months to assemble and cannot be reconstructed from observation alone. The third piece was the most damaging. A WTA-accredited analytics consultant reviewing preparation data for a player scheduled to face Isla in an upcoming clay event flagged an anomaly during a routine audit. The serving strategy embedded in that player's camp preparation drew so directly from Isla's program that the consultant initially assumed the wrong file had been opened. 3 camps, 3 contaminations, 1 source.
When Alex Eala finally addressed the situation publicly, she chose neither fury nor forgiveness. She chose something more surgically effective: clarity. In an interview that circulated globally within minutes of publication, Eala spoke with the measured precision of someone who had spent considerable time deciding exactly which truths required articulation. She confirmed that her team had conducted an internal review of how their training materials had been distributed. She confirmed that conclusions had been reached. She confirmed that those conclusions had been shared with the WTA's Integrity Division and with her legal representatives. Then she said something that stopped the conversation. "I don't regret what I built. I don't regret the investment. What I learned is that protecting your work is just as important as creating it, and I understand that now in a way I didn't before." No direct accusation, no named individual, no performed outrage, just the words of someone who had been educated, expensively, painfully, about where trust ends and documentation begins. The contrast with Sabalenka's lawyered statement was immediate and devastating. One response sounded like a person, the other sounded like a defense filing, and audiences, regardless of their position on the underlying allegations, instinctively understood which voice carried authenticity. The WTA announced a formal review of information security protocols for player training materials, an institutional acknowledgement that the situation had been exposed a genuine vulnerability in how proprietary preparation data was handled across the touring environment. The review did not resolve the specific allegation, but its announcement confirmed that the allegation had been taken seriously enough to generate systemic response. Sabalenka's commercial partners began distance measuring exercises of their own, not public withdrawals, but the particular brand of cautious repositioning that communicates, without announcement, that association with ongoing controversy requires recalibration. Sponsors do not abandon champions impulsively. They simply become temporarily less enthusiastic about scheduling appearances, advancing campaigns, amplifying messaging. The commercial temperature around Sabalenka dropped perceptibly. Eala, meanwhile, faced with the psychological weight of discovering her methodology had been distributed to rivals, having potentially competed against her own intellectual property, carrying the financial and emotional cost of an extraordinary violation, she went back to work, trained in rain when others sought shelter, as she always had, prepared for Stuttgart, kept her ranking defense moving forward with the same relentless forward momentum that had defined every previous chapter of her career. Because that is who she was before this, and she refused to allow what happened to determine who she became after.
The Sabalenka-Eala controversy will settle, eventually, into whatever verdict the formal processes deliver. The WTA review will conclude, legal matters will resolve, the social media storm will find new territory. The three coaching camps will continue preparing players with whatever methodologies survive scrutiny. But some dimensions of this story cannot be resolved by institutional process. They can only be absorbed, carried forward, and converted into the kind of understanding that permanently alters how a person operates within their profession. Alex Eala entered 2025 as a wild card, figuratively and literally, unprotected, open, generous with admiration, transparent about inspiration, earnest in her belief that the sporting community she was ascending into shared her values. She named Sabalenka her dream opponent. She publicly declared a desire to steal her serve. She trained in the rain while her idol rested. Every one of these gestures, in retrospect, reveals a person who gave freely and assumed equivalent return. What she received, instead, was an education. Not the gentle kind, the expensive, public, permanent kind that rearranges a person's understanding of who deserves access to what they create. The tragedy, if tragedy is the correct word for something that also contains significant revelation, was not simply the alleged theft. It was the distortion of an admiration that was real. Alex Eala had genuinely studied Sabalenka, had genuinely aspired toward her serve mechanics, her baseline aggression, her ability to sustain pressure through the critical moments of important matches. That admiration existed before any controversy. It was not manufactured for public consumption. And whatever the formal investigation determines, Eala cannot unknow what she now knows about how that admiration was apparently received. But here is the dimension of the story that refuses to settle into simple narrative, the part that deserves the longest reflection. Alex Eala came through it, not diminished, not derailed. The Stuttgart draw was waiting. The clay season stretched ahead with relatively few points to defend and enormous potential to accumulate. The woman who had already dismantled 3 Grand Slam champions in Miami 2025, who had stormed back from 5-1 down in a U.S. Open third set, who had trained in the Miami rain while the world number 1 chose shelter. That woman was not broken by betrayal. She was clarified by it. And the final question this story deposits at the feet of everyone watching, the question worth carrying into every subsequent chapter of both careers, is not whether Sabalenka did what the allegation described. That verdict belongs to processes with access to evidence this narrative does not possess. The question worth sitting with is simpler and more eternal. What does it say about an institution and a sport when its most admired figures are suspected of exploiting its most admirable ones? And what does it say about Alex Eala that even this couldn't stop her? Drop your verdict in the comments, because this case is far from closed. If this story moved you, if you believe talent deserves protection, subscribe right now. Every chapter of Alex Eala's career is building towards something the tennis world has never witnessed. You don't want to miss what comes next.